Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Computomics podcast. Our guest today has extensive experience in geographical information systems, regional planning, and international cooperation on urban issues. For more than 10 years, he led the food security, agriculture, and rural development work at the BMZ, that's the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. This includes serving as the Deputy Director General and Commissioner for the One World, No Hunger initiative. In 2020, he joined the Crop Trust as Executive Director. Welcome, Stefan Schmitz.
Hello, pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine, Stefan. Great to have you with us. We like to start out with a bit of an icebreaker. And I was wondering, since you are the Executive Director of the Crop Trust, what is something you've collected or are still collecting outside of your work?
Actually, my big hobby, my big passion is photography. So I collect photos. That is what I do. I collect it by taking pictures and job related and beyond. So that is that is where I spend not most of my time outside job, but a lot of time on. Yeah.
That's lovely. Do you have one motive, one picture that's very important maybe for you, or something that sticks in your mind now that we talk about it, something that comes to your mind that you'd like to share?
I'm interested in particular in, urban issues and also in rural issues, and try to get the essence of what make things urban and what make things rural. And that is that kind of a guiding idea along what I do. I do my best to get to get something out of it.
That sounds lovely. I love architectural photography as well as natural landscapes, and it's very interesting sometimes to compare these two supposedly very different landscapes and what they might share as well. Maybe we can get one of your pictures for the show notes.
Okay.
As a special treat.
That one would be urban lovely. And one rural.
Exactly. But yeah, to jump into your work, as I said in the intro, you're the Executive Director of the Crop Trust. What is the Crop Trust for our listeners?
The Crop Trust is an international, legally independent organization supporting seed banks or gene banks all around the world in conserving the plant genetic resources and making those crop diversity conserved available for use, for breeders, for farmers, for researchers. By the turn of the millennium at the latest, there was a growing awareness that the diversity of our crops around the world is crucial for the survival of mankind and for global food security. There are hundreds of thousands of different species and varieties of crops, ancient land races, modern cultivars, neglected and underutilized crops. However, the growing importance of this diversity is matched by its growing threat. And so in 2001, and that is quite an important point here, that was a milestone in the prehistory of the Crop Trust. In 2001, the so-called International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture was adopted by the members of the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Rome. And it entered into force in 2004. This plant treaty is an extremely important multilateral agreement and provides the international framework for, among other things, the protection and conservation of crop diversity and the unhindered free exchange of seeds around the world. Without that, breeding new crops, new varieties wouldn't be possible. And this major political breakthrough in 2004 paved the way for the establishment of the Global Crop Diversity Trust, or Crop Trust for short.
If I can just jump in here real quick, you said it was a change, a breaking point. It enabled this free exchange.
Yes.
How was it before? Were there any, like, what were the issues that someone who wanted to get certain seeds or exchange seeds faced before that treaty?
Yeah. No, I mean that already happened before. Roughly 100 years ago, people start to realize how important it is to conserve those crop diversity and make it available for use. That was a good idea. And then people all over the world, countries started to work on this. However, then there was a growing concern that in particular developing countries, countries of the global south, are not able to provide adequate funding for those seed banks, for those gene banks on their own. So there was a growing risk that all that was collected over the decades got lost, got rotten, and would disappear without proper funding. And to make sure that everything, not just in the global north, but also in the south, is properly conserved and made available, that gave this idea, this concern gave then rise to the idea of the crop trust, then under the treaty. That is a bit of the history behind.
Yeah, I think it's super fascinating because, again, it's almost like a plant that grows, right? You go from the idea of, or just even the realization, oh, this is probably something we should be thinking about. This is something that is important, to actually creating an infrastructure, creating awareness, and giving funding to that infrastructure so it actually sustains.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I'm quite glad to see that this political debate on general biodiversity is becoming now more important. Fortunately, I have to say now. And it's desperately needed that the world, that everybody is aware of the growing threat to general biodiversity on Earth. Crop diversity, so the diversity of our cultural landscape and of our of the crops and of everything we eat, this diversity is an important part of that general biodiversity on Earth, which is sometimes neglected. This crop diversity is a raw material for the development of new improved crop varieties. You have to see, until about 12,000 years ago, people all over the world were hunters and gatherers. At that point, they began to settle down and practice agriculture. Since then, they have made use of nature's diversity. For example, they bred the first crops from the wild archetypes of wheat, maize, and potatoes. And then in the course of time, more and more domesticated crop varieties could be crossed with each other, or domesticated varieties were crossed with their wild relatives. So very important was the fact that people often left their homes and looked for new places to live. When they did so, they took their cultivated seeds with them and spread it all over the world. And well, this led to a constant mix of genetic traits across the globe. The results was a diversity in which the varieties that developed in each place in the world were those that suited the natural conditions there. For examples, the specific soil conditions, temperature, and this diversity also made it possible for crops to win the constant race against new pests and plant diseases. And that is what we have now, thousands and thousands of crops on Earth, which are all very well adapted to local circumstances and to changing circumstances.
And I mean, you already said that your basic, or one of the basic aspects of your mission at the Crop Trust is conserving plant genetic resources, right? Conserving them against the dangers that are out there. Some of them you already mentioned, like pests. I remember in, I think, our anniversary episode, we talked about the fact that with banana, we're actually only getting the second most well-tasting kind of banana because the first one was wiped out by a pest. So how does that conserving work? Can you take us into the vault? Like, how do you actually ensure that the seeds that are within the vault are safe and secure?
Most crops are easily conserved by, well, freezing their seeds at minus 18 degrees. So that is quite simple. So like the freezer you have at homes, you have to look at seed banks or gene banks as first and foremost as big freezers, where you can store them for a very long time. And researchers and breeders, thanks to the better and better information systems that are available, know where on Earth which collections, which varieties are conserved. So they can ask those, send a message and ask for a duplication of those conserved seeds. And so they have access and they can use those genetic traits to work on new varieties. And in modern plant breeding, you sometimes need 50, even more, even sometimes 100 different traits. Bring it together, breed it, cross it, make a try and error, and it takes sometimes years till you come up with a new variety that then is better adapted to changing climate, giving higher yields, more resource efficient, more resistant to pests and diseases, or whatever. Mm-hmm. That is the ongoing process. This now becomes even more important in times of climate change, because this natural process that happened in history, sometimes over centuries long, now is extremely accelerated. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have to expect that current crop varieties, take for example coffee, talk coffee as an example. Current coffee varieties, and that is mainly the so-called Robusta and Arabica, will not be able to grow in 20, 30 years from now on those locations they are right now. Already today, we see that the coffee production is the fields are moving the plantation away from the equator, north and south, and going higher up into the mountains. But these movements confront the coffee growers, the plants, the coffee plants, with other natural conditions. And so as this process continues on in a few years' time, coffee growers need to think about changing the coffee varieties they use. Fortunately, there are altogether 125 coffee varieties on Earth, we know. We only use those two ones. The 123 currently are completely neglected. They are underutilized. But at least they are securely stored in a place, many of them, for example, in a specialized seed banks outside of the city of San Jose in Costa Rica. Yeah, this is one of our partners we cooperate with, we provide funding for, to make sure that these 123 underutilized crop species will be or can be made available for later use in 10 years, in 20 years, or whenever. But we are sure we keep them. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And this with the coffee I gave is just one typical example. There is a huge variety in theory, and as all those 125 coffee varieties were available. Years ago, they were used, they were planted in fields and plantations, but over the years, in this process of more and more industrialization of agriculture, the market more and more focused on those two varieties. No more need for the other 123. And this also true for almost all crops on Earth. Yeah, we know about more than 100,000 rice varieties. We know of more than 100,000 wheat varieties, more than 1,000 potato varieties, and so on. But in the field today, we only use a few of them. But the use is challenged by climate change, and the challenges are rising. So we need to make sure that we conserve the rest, which history brought up over the last 12,000 years, but no longer used these days, that we keep it and have it ready for further breeding purposes, either already now or in the near future. And that is the background, that is the purpose of the crop trust.
Of the crop trust, for sure. That totally makes sense also to have a system that is on the one hand localized, like you mentioned the San Jose seed bank that holds all those coffee varieties, but then also to have this overall structure that gives the funding, that makes sure the information is available, what's where, and also maybe have a centralized storing as well, because one thing that came up as well is we have seed banks and we have the seed vault. Could you go into the difference between the two, or the relationship between the two?
Yeah, sure. There is sometimes a bit confusion about it. So the usual term we use is a term of a seed bank or a gene bank. There are more than 1,700 around the globe, all registered at the Food and Agricultural Organization, the FAO. So almost every country on Earth has its own so-called national gene bank. In Germany, for example, it's the IPK. It's the Institute for Pflanzengenetik und Kulturpflanzenforschung in Gatersleben near Quedlinburg. So every country has at least one national gene bank. But beyond that, there are many other, often smaller ones, as a result of a local initiative or something like that. But altogether, more than 1,700. 18 of those seed banks or gene banks do have a special status. They are recognized as extremely important for the future of global food supply, and they are granted international status by the FAO. So these are the national and international seed banks or gene banks on the one hand. And on the other hand, we are talking about this, what you already mentioned, the seed vault. And this is, from our perspective, the one and only the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. This is a gene bank of a special kind. It is a global seed repository on Spitzbergen, the largest island on the Svalbard archipelago belonging to Norway in the Arctic Ocean, about halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole. This seed vault opened in February 2008 and is about to celebrate its 15th year anniversary now in coming February. Svalbard was chosen for several reasons. Its cold climate and permafrost make the area a perfect location for underground cold storage. The surrounding sandstone is stable for building and is low in radiation. In terms of security, Svalbard scores high marks compared to the locations of many other gene banks in the world. And the seed vault is located an extraordinary 120 meters into the rock, ensuring that the seed rooms will remain naturally frozen even in an event of failure of the mechanical cooling system and rising external air temperatures due to climate change. This specific repository, this vault, this specific gene bank is for up to 4.5 million seed sample represents a groundbreaking international project that was initiated largely and with great commitment by the Norwegian government and is now being implemented. So in a close cooperation between the Norwegians, the Nordic Resource Center, Genetic Resource Center, Norgen, and the Crop Trust. So we are member, the Crop Trust is member of this tripartite partnership. So in a nutshell, while other gene banks are actually always directly linked to research and breeding institutions that multiply and use the stored material for their own purposes, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault serves exclusively for the safekeeping of previously duplicated seeds. The national and international seed banks, those I mentioned before, supply the seed to be stored here, but it remains their property. In the event of a disaster, these duplicates can be redelivered and rebred on behalf of the owner.
Perfect. I think that was really good to go into, because there are some some major differences between the two, and the Crop Trust obviously is kind of the umbrella organization that covers all of them. The one seed vault, the Svalbard Seed Vault, as well as the international partners, I guess, the seed banks you mentioned, the over 1,000 seed banks that we have.
1,700, yeah.
Oh, even almost 2,000. That is quite a lot. I'm sure there are challenges in keeping this going as well. What would you say are the main challenges in your work at the Crop Trust?
Well, the main challenge is not enough money. To be very blunt on this.
It's good to be blunt about that. Get right down to it.
No, of course, to fulfill our mandate completely, we, according to our latest estimates, we require an asset, an endowment value of around 850 million US dollar. That would translate into an annual return on investment and annual income that is necessary to provide enough funding to all those important gene banks holding unique and valuable collections in the global south, all over. So we are not yet there. Currently, the market value of the endowment is about 300 million US dollars. So there is at least a funding gap of 500 million in our assets, so that we can fulfill our mandate completely. So one of the main purposes is further fundraising. We are doing, and we try to raise public awareness of the importance of those plant genetic resources. We provide a lot of technical support, do capacity development for staff working in those gene banks. So there are a lot of challenges. First and foremost, I would say there is the funding issue, but there are technical issues as well. So capacity development is always something, and always we work hard on. And of growing importance is the building up of a global information system to make sure that everybody interested in those resources knows where he can find what seeds, what crops, he needs for research or for breeding. And we are intensively working on these information systems that are then available on the internet and open to interested parties.
Mm-hmm. So if you said you're currently working on that, extending that, or how does one, let's say one would be interested in that, how does one currently gain that information? How does it currently work?
Well, yeah, we are still far away from having all those more than 2 million seed samples that are conserved somewhere around the earth, properly documented and properly put into those archives, and so digital archives, and make it available. It is kind of working with a huge national library, and where you start from zero, you have millions of books, yeah, and now you start working on a catalog that is available not just only on cards, but also in digital form. Yeah, so that does not just mean to write down 2 million cards. You need to know about the exact content, yeah, of the location, of the history, of the genotypic and phenotypic properties of what is stored. So, like in a normal library, you're giving perhaps an executive summary of the book. There you also need to provide what we call passport data. And that, you can imagine, is a lot of work.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure you need a lot of, is this something that you use volunteer work for as well?
That is fully decentralized. We encourage gene banks to do it on their own. We provide capacity development. We give support, sometimes financial support for those who are not able to do it. But we are more or less the managers and coordinators of that work that is fully decentralized. No, we do not have in our offices sitting 10 or more interns.
That would be a gargantuan task for them as well. But I'm sure, or I could imagine that maybe your project partners on the national level or in the various locations around the globe would probably work with volunteers there as well, because it is a huge task, like you've demonstrated quite well. Maybe if we move to the more broader view, you were also a participant at COP27 at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, because like you've mentioned before, it is something that impacts the seed vaults, seed banks as well, or that shows how important they are. Climate change puts huge pressures on all of us, and on that field especially. What would you say? What are your key takeaways from the Sharm el Sheikh conference, the COP27?
Yeah, well, I was quite happy to see that agriculture, it on a very long and windy way now, is gaining more and more important status within the climate debate. Yeah, raised the profiles. While years back, hardly anybody at climate conferences recognized agriculture as important. Agriculture is important. On the one hand, agriculture is suffering a lot under climate change. Agriculture needs to adapt to climate change very quickly, on the one hand. And on the other hand, agriculture also adds to the overall human carbon footprint in a considerable way. And we, as a crop trust, do our best to provide means to agriculture adapt to climate change, and also agriculture to be able to use to reduce its carbon footprints. both through breeding new varieties. We provide one of the most important prerequisites for that. And of course, we are happy and glad to see that there is a growing awareness of the importance of crop diversity for these purposes on international level on level of the COP, of the Conference of Party negotiations and events, the latest one in Sharm el-Sheikh, as you mentioned, but also at other international fora. For example, a few weeks later, shortly before Christmas, there was this Conference of Parties of the Biodiversity Convention that was held in Montreal, likewise important from our perspective. And there also we support the idea, the concept, the philosophy of agriculture, and in principle the crop diversity as a very important element within this triangle of food, biodiversity, and climate change, which I regard as those three among the most important key challenges of 21st century.
I completely concur. Unfortunately, I think we could be talking for at least another half hour, if not more. We have come to the end of our time together, and I'd like to thank you, Stefan, for giving us such great insight into the work of the Crop Trust, how you manage to coordinate and support both financially and with your organization over 1,700 seed banks worldwide. Also with the Seed Vault contributing to the security of conserving biodiversity, conserving gene information, and again, contributing to that key triangle that you just mentioned of food, biodiversity, and climate change. We will be linking, obviously, to the Crop Trust and all resources or facts that you mentioned in our show notes. So to our listeners out there, please feel free to drop by computomics.com to check out some links and hopefully also see two of Stefan's own photographs showing us urban landscape and agricultural or natural landscapes next to each other.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was a great pleasure talking to you.
You too, and hope to have you back with us at some point, and then obviously also our listeners for our next episode of the Computomics podcast.